I sort of, when I first started thinking about the idea of speed and construction and architecture in China, what immediately came to mind was to think of speed as a function of bureaucracy and the bureaucratic system here. As many of you know, but for those of you who don't, officials in China, generally speaking, have 5-year terms during which they're evaluated on a series of very quantifiable, quantified measures, and that in many ways drives the speed of what's done and what's built in China, because these officials, in order to move on to the next step, are again evaluated on what they accomplish and what they accomplish, because land is so tied, especially to local government and local government revenues, is these construction projects. Now, because of the quickness of this pace, sometimes these projects, which are often quite massive, are not necessarily the most well thought out and not necessarily driven purely for the benefit of the greater good. China has done amazing things architecturally and urbanistically in recent decades, and it's been incredible to see what's happened, but I don't think it's controversial to say that the rapid development here has also caused problems as well. So I started wondering, if can we draw a link between bureaucracy and the bureaucratic system and some of the, let's say, problem areas in development in China. So first slide, please. As I was thinking about this about 2 weeks ago, I was really fascinated by this quote from Xinhua, the official news agency, that announced that Xi Jinping, the president, reminded party members of mounting hazards let's cut off, sorry. They face, which can be concluded as the 4 forms of decadence, namely formalism, bureaucratism, or bureaucratism, I'm not trying to say that, hedonism, and extravagance. Now, it was really interesting to me to hear the country's own leader choose these 4 words and sort of pointing out some of the issues that the party sees in its own work styles, as it was described. This is part of a mass lying campaign, which, as many of you know, has a lot to do with it's sort of a tradition in post-1949 China of bringing the party closer to the people, and this is part of it. So, given that the party has identified these issues in its own quote-unquote, and I'm quoting the party here, work styles, and given that we can, I think we have to acknowledge that the official bureaucracy does have an impact on the way things are built, can we think of some of the problem areas of China's development in terms of these 4 words: formalism, bureaucratism, I'll say, hedonism, and extravagance. So next slide. Now, formalism, in this case, I interpret it as being sort of undue emphasis on outward appearances. Maybe a focus on sort of ritual and ceremony that places primacy on the gesture in a way that inofficial but separates officials from the people. Now, do we see this happening in architecture in China and urban planning? Do we see vast swaths of land being given to what might be called empty gestures, large projects that lead from nowhere to nowhere, that aren't used by people, but rather are meant purely as a formal symbolic gesture. Next step. Bureaucratism. And I should say that these things, formalism, bureaucratism, hedonism, extravagance, these are not by any means limited to China. I think we can apply them universally to most situations in most countries, but we're talking about China here specifically. And in the case of bureaucratism, we could perhaps think of that as being rules and procedures that sort of have evolved a life of their own and become about themselves. So rules and procedures for the sake of rules and procedures, a sort of self-perpetuating bureaucracy that exists for itself and that does not give it and implements its prerogatives irregardless of specific situations and conditions. Now, in China, as in many places, again, this is not unique to China by any means, there are lots of perhaps well-intentioned rules with building having to do with sort of minimum daylight requirements, distances between buildings for fire code and so on and so forth. But many times those are applied in very blanket ways, again, irregardless of the particular conditions or sites in which they're happening. So what you wind up with in many cases, and again, this is not only China, but in many parts of the world, is this kind of repetitive uniformity across the urban landscape, which we can question how sort of, we can question the aesthetic merits, but in terms of urban planning, from an urban planning perspective, at least, they are definitely questionable in terms of the sprawl they create, the traffic congestion, as well as the potential sense of alienation by sort of siloing people in these isolated towers, often behind these large swaths of gated communities, as they often are. Next, please. Hedonism. Now, I think of hedonism as a sort of self-indulgent pursuit of short-term pleasure without regard to long-term consequences, right? Is that being expressed urbanistically in China? The wholesale destruction of vast swaths of the historic districts of cities, often for short-term commercial and political and other gains. Is that being done without concern for the long-term costs, not only in terms of the loss of cultural heritage, but also the destruction of communities that have been developed over years and decades and centuries. Next, please. Extravagance. Now, I think we can all think of more extravagant examples in this image here on the screen, but what I liked about this image was this is a relatively new administrative building for what I believe is a county-level administration in Hainan. And what I love is you have your ionic columns, your temple front, your dome, of course the all-important opening ceremony with the banners, the sailors, the big red carpet, for what's essentially a three-story building for a county-level government. I think this shows the extent to which sort of notions of extravagance have filtered down and been expressed across the landscape here. And we can wonder if, once again, if these four decadences are a way of seeing and conceptualizing some of what we might see as problems in architecture and urbanism in China. Now, that being said, what I think is really hopeful is that if we are to agree with Xi Jinping that formalism, bureaucratism, hedonism, and extravagance have been issues, and if we are to have hope that the efforts at reform will proceed and progress on a good path, then perhaps there's hope that kind of reform may lead to a better type of architecture, a better type of development, a better type of urbanism that is, as a mass line campaign, is about closer to the people. I think I do want to end this on that hopeful note, and as far as what happens next, as we all know, only time will tell. Thank you.